A beast protects not because it's strong, but because it knows love. Old Mason Thompson's words echoed in Blake's mind as he stared at the broken fence. Titan was gone. His prized Brahman bull, nearly 2,000 pounds of muscle and devotion, had vanished. The morning sun illuminated dark smears along the weathered wood. Blood. Blake's heart pounded as he followed the crimson trail toward the shoreline. The tide had already started rising, waves lapping higher with each passing minute. "Thompson, we spotted him," Ranger Emma Whitfield's voice cracked through the radio. "He's swimming offshore, heading toward the sandbar." Blake squinted against the glare. In the distance, something massive moved through the water. "We have less than 6 hours before high tide completely submerges that sandbar," Emma warned. "Whatever he's doing out there, we're running out of time." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning sun beat down on Clearwater Beach, turning the white sand into a glittering blanket that stretched along Florida's Gulf Coast. Blake Thompson wiped sweat from his weathered brow, his eyes never leaving the distant figure in the water. At 53, the former Marine still carried himself with military precision, but the lines etching his face told stories of battles fought long after his service ended. "How long has he been doing this?" Emma asked, adjusting her Florida Wildlife Service cap. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform crisp despite the humid air. "3 days that I've noticed," Blake replied, his voice rough with worry. "First time I thought he just got spooked by something. Second time I figured it was some kind of fluke. But now—" His words trailed off as he handed Emma the binoculars. Through the lenses, Titan came into sharper focus. The massive Brahman bull, with his distinctive hump and powerful build, was swimming with surprising grace. But what caught Emma's attention were the long, angry gashes along his silvery gray hide, fresh wounds. "Something's hurting him out there," she said, lowering the binoculars. "Bulls don't typically seek out water like this, especially the ocean." Blake's ranch, Sunrise Pastures, had been in the Thompson family for 3 generations. Once prosperous, recent years had brought mounting debts and hardship. The hurricane that had torn through the coast 2 months ago hadn't helped, destroying fences and flooding grazing land. Titan represented one of Blake's last valuable assets. "We've got a team bringing a boat around," Emma said, checking her watch. "The tide's coming in faster than usual with that storm system approaching from the south." In the distance, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising more trouble. The beach was eerily empty, locals heeding the weather warnings. Derek Carson, Emma's colleague, approached with a tablet displaying tide charts. "High tide peaks at 3:47 p.m. today, and it's running about 2 feet higher than normal due to the storm surge." His expression was grim. "If there's something on that sandbar that's drawing him out there, it'll be completely underwater by then." Blake squinted at the horizon, where a thin strip of sand was barely visible above the waterline. Something moved on the sandbar, small, dark shapes that seemed to shift and cluster together. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Emma trained her binoculars on the distant sandbar, adjusting the focus. Her sharp intake of breath made Blake's heart sink. "I see cattle," she said quietly. "Small ones. Calves, I think. They're trapped out there." Blake grabbed the binoculars, his hands trembling slightly. Through the lenses, he could now make out what appeared to be several small calves huddled on the highest point of the sandbar, waves already beginning to lap at their legs. "My God," he whispered. "That's what he's been doing. He's trying to reach them." Blake remembered the day Titan came to Sunrise Pastures as clearly as if it were yesterday. The spring morning had been unusually cool, with mist rising from the pastures as the sun broke through the clouds. He hadn't been looking for another bull. Couldn't afford one, truth be told. But when Mason Williams from the neighboring farm called about a Brahman calf with something special, Blake found himself driving over anyway. "That there's no ordinary bull," Mason had said, his weathered hand resting on the fence as they watched the silver-gray calf tottering around the pen. "His mama died birthing him. Hand-raised him myself." The calf had approached them without fear, his large, intelligent eyes seeming to study Blake with unusual intensity. When Blake reached out, the young bull had pressed his velvety nose against his palm, a gesture so trusting it had caught Blake off guard. "What's so special about him?" Blake had asked, trying not to sound too interested. The last thing he needed was another mouth to feed. Mason had smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "You'll see. Some animals are just born with an old soul. This one understands things." When Blake had looked skeptical, Mason added, "I've been raising cattle for 57 years, son. I know the difference between a good animal and an extraordinary one." Blake had left with the calf that day, paying far less than he was worth thanks to Mason's generosity. He'd named him Titan, a name that seemed too grand for the gangly calf, but one he would grow into magnificently. Over the 5 years that followed, Titan had indeed proven himself extraordinary. He grew to an impressive size, with powerful muscles rippling beneath his silver coat and a presence that commanded respect from the rest of the herd. But it wasn't his physical attributes that made him special. "I've never seen anything like it, Doctor." Sarah Mitchell had remarked during a routine veterinary visit last year, "The way he positions himself between you and the other cattle, watching, assessing, and did you notice how he guided that limping heifer to the water trough earlier? Most bulls wouldn't give a second thought to a struggling herd member." Blake had noticed. He'd seen Titans stand guard over newborn calves, intervene when younger bulls became too aggressive with each other, and even nudge open gates with his horns when a pasture grew too muddy after rain. Intelligence wasn't unusual in cattle. They were smarter than most people gave them credit for. But Titan's awareness seemed to go beyond instinct. The hurricane had hit without much warning. Forecasters had predicted a Category 1 storm that would skirt the coastline, but it had intensified rapidly and changed course, slamming directly into clear water with Category 3 winds and a devastating storm surge. Blake had been frantically moving younger cattle to higher ground when a massive pine had crashed down, pinning him in rapidly rising floodwater. What happened next still seemed like a dream. Somehow, Titan had appeared through the driving rain, pushing against the tree with his massive shoulders until Blake could pull himself free. The memory was fragmented. Pain, roaring wind, the surprising gentleness of Titan guiding him back to higher ground before disappearing again into the storm to lead other cattle to safety. Blake had told no one about this. Who would believe that a bull had deliberately saved his life? He'd convinced himself it was a coincidence. The Titan had simply been spooked by the storm and had accidentally helped him in the process. But deep down, he knew better. After the hurricane, everything had changed. Insurance covered only a fraction of the damage, and feed prices had skyrocketed due to regional shortages. The bank had given him 6 months to catch up on mortgage payments before they'd foreclose on land his grandfather had purchased with cash. Blake stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror one morning, barely recognizing the desperate man looking back at him. That was the day he'd made the call to Henderson Meat Processing, the day he'd agreed to sell Titan for slaughter. "It's just business," he told himself, feeling hollow. "Just livestock." But even as he'd signed the preliminary paperwork, he couldn't bring himself to look at Titan grazing peacefully in the field outside his window. He'd put off finalizing the sale, finding excuses to delay the inevitable. Then Titan had started disappearing, swimming out to the sandbar, and now... A shout from the beach pulled Blake from his memories. The rescue team had arrived with boats and equipment. Emma was waving him over, pointing to something in the water. Blake shielded his eyes against the sun's glare. Titan had changed course and was swimming back toward shore, his powerful form cutting through the waves with purpose. As he watched, Blake noticed something odd about the bull's pattern. He wasn't swimming randomly. He was making a wide arc, carefully positioning himself between the approaching boats and the distant sandbar where the calves huddled. It was then that Blake remembered something Mason had said years ago when he'd sold him the calf. "This one's got his mama's heart. She died protecting him, you know. Stood between him and a gator that got into the birthing pen. Some things run deeper than training. Some things are in the blood." Blake felt a lump form in his throat as the realization hit him. Titan wasn't acting erratically. He wasn't confused or injured and blindly swimming out to sea. He was deliberately placing himself between potential threats and those vulnerable calves, just as his mother had done for him. And Blake had been ready to send him to slaughter. Dr. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her polarized sunglasses as she studied the footage on the monitor. The marine biologist had arrived 20 minutes ago, bringing specialized equipment and expertise that the wildlife rangers welcomed. The small command center they'd established on the beach hummed with activity as rescue personnel moved with practiced efficiency. "There," she said, pointing to a dark shadow moving beneath the surface near Titan. "That's a bull shark, easily 8 feet long. And it's not alone." Blake felt his stomach twist. "Sharks? Plural?" "The blood from Titan's wounds is attracting them," Sarah explained, her voice clinical but her expression concerned. "Bull sharks are one of the few species that can tolerate both salt and fresh water. They're also among the most aggressive." The drone footage showed Titan's seemingly erratic swimming pattern, but viewed from above, a clear strategy emerged. The massive bull was creating deliberate disturbances in the water, drawing the shark's attention away from the sandbar where 6 calves huddled together as the tide continued to rise. "I've never seen behavior like this in cattle," Emma said, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's almost as if he knows exactly what he's doing," Blake finished, his voice rough with emotion. "He's protecting them." Derek Carson, the senior wildlife ranger, crossed his arms as he studied the monitor. "The question is, how did those calves get out there in the first place? That sandbar is a quarter-mile offshore." Blake rubbed his jaw, thinking back to the hurricane damage. The storm changed the coastline. There used to be a continuous barrier of dunes connecting that sandbar to the mainland. The hurricane washed most of it away, but I bet at very low tide there's still a temporary land bridge. Sarah nodded. "That makes sense." The calves probably walked across during low tide, got stranded when the water rose, and now Titan is trying to protect them. "So what's the plan?" Blake asked, looking at the gathering storm clouds with growing unease. "That tide's coming in fast." Derek unrolled a coastal map across the hood of his truck. "We've got 2 boats. We can approach from opposite sides, get the calves loaded, and bring them back to shore." "What about Titan?" Blake asked. A moment of uncomfortable silence followed. Emma and Derek exchanged glances. "Mr. Thompson," Derek began carefully, "our priority has to be those calves. They're small enough to transport. Titan is nearly a ton of frightened, possibly aggressive bull in open water with sharks present. The logistics of safely extracting an animal that size." "We're not leaving him out there," Blake said firmly, his jaw set. Sarah studied the monitor again, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The sharks are primarily attracted to the blood in the water. If we can get Titan to shore first, the sharks might disperse, making it safer to rescue the calves. Or they might just focus entirely on the calves once Titan's gone," Emma countered. "We need to think this through carefully." As they debated, an elderly man approached their makeshift command center. He walked with a slight limp, leaning on a carved wooden cane, his skin tanned and weathered by decades in the sun. "Joe Blackwood," he introduced himself, nodding respectfully to the group. "Been fishing these waters since before most of you were born. Heard you folks got a situation." Blake recognized him from town, a retired commercial fisherman known for his uncanny ability to predict weather and fish movements. Some locals called him Old Joe, though never to his face. "Mr. Blackwood," Emma acknowledged him. "We're dealing with a rather unusual rescue operation." Joe peered at the monitor, then out toward the water. "Bull trying to save calves from sharks," he said matter-of-factly. "Ain't the first time I've seen animals showing more sense than people give 'em credit for." Blake looked at him sharply. "You've seen something like this before?" "Not with cattle," Joe admitted. "But these waters have their stories. That sandbar out there, old-timers used to call it Guardian Shoal. Story goes that animals in trouble would find refuge there, and sometimes other animals would help them." He shrugged. "Most folks called it superstition, but I've seen enough in my days to know there's more happening in nature than science has figured out." Derek looked skeptical, but didn't dismiss the old fisherman. "Any practical advice for us, Mr. Blackwood?" Joe studied the sky. "Storms coming in faster than predicted. You've got 4 hours at most before those waves make boat rescue impossible. And that bull shark out there," he pointed to the largest shadow on the screen, "that's old Scarside. I've been tracking him for years, missing a chunk of his dorsal fin, see? Mean as they come, and smart, too." Sarah leaned in to look. "You're right, the dorsal fin is damaged." "How did you spot that from this footage?" Joe tapped his temple. "When you've been watching these waters as long as I have, you notice things." A sudden commotion interrupted them as one of the boat crews shouted from the shoreline. Blake turned to see Titan swimming toward the beach, his massive form struggling against the increasingly rough surf. "He's coming in!" Blake started moving toward the water, but Emma caught his arm. "Wait," she said, pointing to the monitor. "Look at the pattern." On the screen they could see Titan swimming in a wide circle, approaching the shore but then turning back toward the sandbar. He repeated this pattern several times. "It's like he's showing us something," Sarah murmured. "Trying to lead us." Blake watched, transfixed, as Titan's pattern became clearer. The bull would swim toward shore, turn to look back at the sandbar, then return to position himself between the sharks and the calves. "He wants help," Blake said softly. "He's asking for help." Derek checked his watch. "Tide's rising faster than expected. Those calves have less than 3 hours before that sandbar's completely submerged." "Let's move," Emma decided. Team 1 takes the smaller boat and attempts to reach the calves. Team 2 stands by to assist Titan if he approaches shore again. As they prepared to launch the boats, Blake made a startling observation. "Those calves," he said, pointing to the drone footage, "they're not all the same color." Sarah zoomed in on the image. Among the light-colored Brahman calves huddled on the sandbar, one stood out, a smaller, darker calf. "That's not one of mine," Blake said, confusion evident in his voice. "That looks like an Angus calf." Joe squinted at the screen. "Neighbors, maybe? Wind could have carried scent of your cattle, drawn it to follow yours." "Or Titan brought it there," Sarah suggested quietly. "Rescued it from somewhere else." The implications of this possibility hung in the air as the first rescue boat prepared to launch. If true, it meant Titan wasn't just protecting his own herd, he was deliberately saving other cattle as well. Blake stared out at the bull still swimming protective patterns around the sandbar. "Titan," he whispered, "what are you trying to tell us?" The first rescue boat battled against increasingly choppy waters, making slow progress toward the sandbar. Blake paced along the shoreline, unable to stay still as anxiety gnawed at him. Emma approached, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "while we were setting up the equipment, I received some paperwork from headquarters." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Standard procedure for livestock incidents includes checking recent sale and transportation records. Blake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He knew what was coming. Emma pulled a folded document from her pocket. This is a sale agreement between you and Henderson Meat Processing, dated 3 weeks ago. For Titan. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crash of waves and distant rumble of thunder. Blake turned away, unable to meet her eyes. "You were going to sell him for slaughter," Emma stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "I was desperate," Blake finally said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The bank's been breathing down my neck since the hurricane. I've got 6 weeks left before foreclosure." He gestured helplessly toward the horizon. "That bull out there, the one risking his life right now, he's worth $15,000 to Henderson's." Emma's eyes widened. "That's a fortune for one bull. Purebred Brahman with his bloodline and confirmation, he's worth every penny. With that money, I could have kept the farm running another 6 months." Blake kicked at the sand. "At least that's what I told myself." Emma studied him. "But you haven't completed the sale. The document isn't finalized." "I couldn't do it," Blake admitted. "Kept putting it off, making excuses." He watched Titan in the distance, still circling protectively despite his obvious exhaustion. "Guess some part of me knew he wasn't just livestock." "Mr. Thompson?" "Blake," he corrected her. "If you're going to judge me, at least use my first name." "I'm not judging you," Emma said quietly. "I've worked with enough ranchers to understand the impossible choices you sometimes face." She folded the document and handed it to him. "What matters is what you choose to do now." Blake took the paper, staring at it for a long moment before tearing it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces scatter in the wind. "There. Decision made." A shout from the command center drew their attention. Derek was waving them over urgently. "We've got trouble," he announced as they hurried back. "The marine forecast just updated. That storm system is accelerating. We're looking at tropical storm conditions within 2 hours." Dr. Sarah Mitchell pointed to the radar display on her tablet. "The leading edge is already affecting wave height and current strength. Our window for boat rescue is closing fast." Blake looked at the monitor showing Titan's increasingly labored movements. "He's exhausted. How long has he been swimming now?" "Based on when you first noticed him missing, at least 5 hours," Sarah answered. "That's extraordinary endurance for any land mammal, let alone one his size." Old Joe had been quietly observing from the edge of their group. Now he spoke up, his weathered face grim. "There's something else you should know about that shark out there, Old Scarside. He's not just big, he's smart. Been known to follow fishing boats for miles, waiting for catches to be pulled in. He remembers patterns." "What are you saying?" Blake asked. "I'm saying he's figured out what your bull is doing. Notice how he's staying just outside the circle Titan's swimming. He's waiting for him to tire out." Joe tapped his cane on the sand for emphasis. "And sharks can sense exhaustion in their prey. Blood in the water, labored movements, it's like ringing a dinner bell." As if confirming Joe's assessment, the drone footage showed the large shark suddenly changing its pattern, cutting directly across Titan's protective circle, forcing the bull to veer sharply to intercept it. The maneuver worked. The shark turned away from the sandbar, but the effort cost Titan precious energy. "We need a new plan," Emma decided. "The boat isn't going to reach the sandbar in time." Derek studied the maps spread out before them. "What about approaching from the other side? There's a deeper channel there, but it might give us a more direct route." "Too risky with those sharks," Sarah countered, "and the approaching storm is pushing the currents in exactly the wrong direction." Blake had fallen silent, staring intently at the coastal map. His finger traced a thin line extending from a point half a mile down the beach. "What about this?" he asked suddenly. "This old pier foundation. It extends almost halfway to the sandbar." Joe leaned in, squinting at the map. "Johnson's Pier. Hurricane took the walkway 15 years ago, but the concrete supports are still there under the water. Creates a kind of underwater bridge. Could we use that somehow? Emma asked. Blake's mind was racing. At low tide, those supports create a path. It's how the calves must have gotten out there in the first place, wandered down the beach during yesterday's extremely low tide, followed the pier ruins, then got caught when the tide came back in. But the tide's coming in now, not going out, Derek pointed out. Yes, but those concrete supports rise about 4 feet from the seabed, Blake explained. If we could somehow mark the path, create a guide rope along the supports, we could lead the calves back along the same route they took out there, Emma finished, excitement building in her voice. They'd still be walking in water, but it would be shallow enough for them to keep their footing. Sarah looked skeptical. That might work for the calves, but what about Titan? He's too heavy. Those old supports might not hold him. They won't need to, Blake said. Titan's a strong swimmer. Once he sees the calves are safe, he'll follow them back. And the sharks? Derek asked. Joe had been listening quietly. Now he straightened, his expression resolute. I can help with that. Still got my old commercial fishing boat. With the right chum mixture, I can draw those sharks away from your rescue path. Emma frowned. That's dangerous, Mr. Blackwood. Been dancing with sharks for 60 years, Joe replied with a dismissive wave. Besides, I owe that bull a favor. You do? Blake asked, surprised. Joe's weathered face softened. That black Angus calf out there? Pretty sure it's from the Miller farm next to mine. Little heifer, about 2 months old. Disappeared during the storm surge last week, he paused. Miller's granddaughter was heartbroken. That calf was her 4-H project. You think Titan found it and brought it to the sandbar? Sarah asked, sounding doubtful. Don't know how else it got there, Joe said simply. All I know is, if there's a chance to bring that calf back to that little girl, I'm taking it. As they refined their plan, Blake stepped away from the group, walking to the water's edge. The tide had risen significantly in just the last hour. On the sandbar, now barely visible above the waves, the calves had clustered at the highest point, pressed together in fear. And still Titan swam, his movements slower now but no less purposeful. Even from this distance, Blake could see the determination in every labored stroke, every deliberate turn to intercept the sharks that continued to circle. A memory surfaced. His father standing in their field 20 years ago, watching a mother cow frantically protecting her newborn calf from coyotes. That's not just instinct you're seeing, his father had told him. That's love, pure and simple. Animals know love just like we do, maybe even better sometimes. They just don't complicate it like humans do. Blake had dismissed it as his father's sentimentality. Livestock was livestock, assets on a balance sheet. That's what he'd been taught by the modern farming world anyway. Now, watching Titan fighting against exhaustion and predators to protect calves that weren't even his own, Blake understood what his father had meant, and he felt ashamed of how close he'd come to betraying that love for mere money. We're ready, Emma called from behind him. The rescue team had assembled their equipment, ropes, flotation devices, and markers to create a guided path along the submerged pier supports. Blake turned, a new determination hardening his features. Let's bring them home. The sky darkened as Blake waded into the water, securing the first marker buoy to the remnants of the old pier. The rescue operation had split into 3 coordinated teams. Derek led the boat team standing by to assist with the calves. Joe had taken his weathered fishing vessel out to draw the sharks away, and Blake, Emma, and 2 wildlife officers worked to establish the underwater pathway. Careful there, Emma called as Blake moved deeper, the water now reaching his chest. Current's getting stronger. Blake nodded, fighting against the pull of the tide as he tied another bright orange marker to the submerged concrete support. 20 feet ahead, a wildlife officer named Rodriguez secured the next section of guide rope. In his mind, Blake kept seeing flashes from the past 5 years with Titan, the bull as a gangly yearling learning to navigate the pastures. Titan standing watch over a newborn calf during a thunderstorm. The hurricane night when Blake had been pinned under the fallen tree, water rising around him, and Titan appearing like a silver ghost through the rain. "I should have known," Blake muttered to himself, securing another knot. "All those times you were trying to show me." 3 years earlier, Blake had been fixing fences when he'd noticed Titan behaving oddly. The bull had been pacing along the pasture edge, occasionally stopping to look directly at Blake, then turning to stare intently at something in the distance. "What's got you all worked up?" Blake had asked absently, hammering another staple into the fence post. Titan had continued the behavior until Blake, more annoyed than curious, finally followed the bull's gaze. In the far corner of the field, partially hidden by tall grass, a heifer was struggling to give birth. Blake had immediately called the vet and helped deliver a healthy calf. Later, Dr. Sarah had remarked, "Lucky you noticed her in time." "Another hour, and we might have lost both mother and calf." Blake had nodded, accepting the credit, never mentioning that it was Titan who had alerted him. It had seemed silly then, the idea that the bull had deliberately sought his help. "Blake, watch your footing!" Emma's shout snapped him back to the present as a stronger wave nearly knocked him off the submerged pier foundation. He grabbed the guide rope to steady himself, feeling the powerful pull of the tide. The water had turned murky with stirred-up sand, making it increasingly difficult to see the concrete supports. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now. They were running out of time. At the command center on shore, Dr. Sarah maintained radio contact with all teams. "Joe reports he's successfully drawing the sharks northward," she informed them. "But the weather radar looks worse. That storm front is accelerating." Blake squinted through the rain that had begun to fall. They'd marked about half the route to the sandbar, but the conditions were deteriorating rapidly. The sandbar itself was now barely visible, just a small strip of sand above the choppy waves. The calves had bunched even tighter together, trembling as water lapped at their legs. And Titan! Blake's heart clenched as he spotted the bull. Despite Joe's efforts to draw away the sharks, one particularly large predator remained, circling closer to the exhausted animal. Titan was still swimming, still positioning himself between the shark and the sandbar, but his movements had become sluggish, his massive head barely clearing the water with each labored breath. "He can't keep this up much longer," Blake said into his radio, urgency tightening his voice. "We need to hurry," Emma agreed, securing another marker. "The path is almost—" A mechanical sputtering interrupted her as the rescue boat's engine coughed, then died. Derek's voice crackled over the radio. "Engine failure!" "We're working on it, but with these waves—" Blake watched helplessly as the boat drifted, the team struggling to restart the engine against the strengthening current, another complication in an already desperate situation. 6 months ago, Blake had sat at his kitchen table, bills spread before him, the bank's foreclosure notice prominently displayed. His grandfather had purchased this land with cash, saved over 20 years of working double shifts at the steel mill. His father had expanded it into one of the most respected cattle operations in the county. And Blake was about to lose it all. The Henderson meat processing offer had seemed like salvation. Premium price for a premium bull. One animal traded for the survival of the entire ranch. A simple business decision. He'd walked out to the pasture that evening, watching Titan grazing peacefully in the golden sunset light. The bull had approached the fence, as he often did when Blake appeared, and gently pressed his massive forehead against Blake's outstretched hand. "Just business," Blake had whispered, trying to convince himself. But even then, something had felt fundamentally wrong about the decision. He'd delayed finalizing the paperwork, telling himself he was just waiting for a better offer, not acknowledging the real reason, the growing awareness that Titan was more than just livestock. "Blake, look!" Emma's shout pulled him from the memory. Through the intensifying rain, he saw movement on the sandbar. One of the calves, the small black Angus, had slipped down the sandy slope and was struggling in deeper water. Without hesitation, Titan abandoned his protective circuit and powered toward the struggling calf. The shark, sensing opportunity, changed course to intercept. "No!" Blake lunged forward instinctively, only to be held back by Emma. "You can't help them from here," she said firmly. "We need to complete the path." Blake watched in agonizing suspense as Titan reached the panicking calf. The bull didn't attempt to push the smaller animal back onto the sandbar. Instead, he positioned himself alongside it, creating a living barrier between the calf and the deeper water, giving it something to lean against as they both moved back toward the higher ground. The shark circled closer. Titan, seeming to sense the predator's approach, suddenly turned to face it directly. Even exhausted, wounded, the bull presented an intimidating figure, lowering his horned head toward the water as the shark approached. At the last moment, the shark veered away, unwilling to challenge the larger animal head-on. The moment of respite allowed Titan to guide the Angus calf back to the relative safety of the sandbar. "Did you see that?" Emma breathed, awe evident in her voice despite the tension of the moment. "He knew exactly what to do." Blake nodded wordlessly, a lump forming in his throat. The bull's intelligence and courage were undeniable, and Blake had nearly sent him to slaughter for a stack of bills. "The path is ready," Rodriguez called, securing the final marker to the last visible pier support. "But with the boat out of commission, how do we get out to the sandbar to lead the calves back?" Blake looked at the marked path stretching into the churning water, then at Titan still guarding the increasingly vulnerable sandbar. The distance seemed impossible in the worsening conditions. "I'll go," he said, his decision instant and unwavering. "Blake, no!" Emma protested. "The current's too strong, and those sharks—" "Joe's drawing most of them away," Blake countered, already checking his safety harness attached to the guide rope. "And Titan's been out there for hours." "If he can do it, so can I." Before anyone could object further, Blake descended fully into the water, using the guide rope to pull himself along the submerged path. The current tugged at him, considerably stronger than when they'd started. Rain pelted down, reducing visibility and turning the surface into a chaos of white caps and spray. Through his earpiece he could hear the team's concerned voices, but he focused only on moving forward, one concrete support to the next. His military training kicked in, mission focus, tactical movement, controlled breathing. Halfway to the sandbar, a sudden wave caught him off guard, pulling him off the submerged pier foundation. For a terrifying moment he was fully suspended in the churning water, the guide rope his only connection to the path. Using every ounce of strength, he pulled himself back onto the concrete support, gasping for breath. "Blake! Status!" Emma's voice was tight with concern. "I'm okay," he managed, continuing forward with even greater caution. "Almost there." The sandbar was close now, no more than 30 yards away. He could see the calves clearly, 6 frightened animals huddled together as water swirled around their legs. And there was Titan, standing guard at the edge of the deepening water, his massive form somehow still projecting strength despite his obvious exhaustion. Blake felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just going to save the calves, he was going to bring Titan home too. The bull deserved that much and more. As Blake neared the final stretch, Titan suddenly turned, fixing him with a direct stare. For a moment neither moved, man and bull regarding each other across the churning water. Then, to Blake's astonishment, Titan began moving toward him, deliberately and carefully navigating the shallows. "He's coming to me," Blake reported, hardly believing what he was seeing. "The bull understands," came Joe's gravelly voice over the radio. "He knows you're there to help." Blake held his position, watching as Titan approached. The bull moved with obvious pain, his wounds visible even through the rain and spray. Deep gashes along his flanks, bite marks on his powerful shoulders, exhaustion in every labored step. When Titan reached him, the bull did something Blake would never forget. He lowered his massive head and gently nudged Blake's chest, exactly as he had done as a calf all those years ago, a gesture of recognition, of trust. "I'm here, old friend," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion as he placed his hand on the bull's broad forehead. "I'm going to get you all home." With Titan seemingly understanding the situation, Blake moved past him toward the remaining calves. The young animals were terrified, eyes wide with fear as water continued to rise around them. "The black Angus calf," Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. "Can you confirm it's from the Miller farm?" Blake approached the smallest calf, noting the distinctive white marking on its forehead. "Heart-shaped white patch?" he asked. "Right flank has a Miller brand?" "That's her," Joe confirmed. "That's little Jessie Miller's calf." Blake felt a wave of emotion. Somehow Titan had found this calf, separated from its home during the storm, and brought it to relative safety. Not his own species, not his responsibility, yet the bull had acted with what could only be described as compassion. "Time to go home," Blake told the trembling calves, using the calm, steady voice he'd developed over years of handling livestock. Carefully, he began guiding them toward the marked underwater path, knowing their journey back would be perilous even with the guide ropes and buoys. As the first calf stepped tentatively into deeper water, Blake held his breath. Would they follow the path? Would they panic? To his relief, the calf found its footing on the submerged concrete, moving forward with nervous determination. The others began to follow, creating a line of small, bobbing heads in the choppy water. And behind them all came Titan, moving with renewed purpose despite his wounds and exhaustion, as if understanding that the end of their ordeal was finally in sight. The storm intensified as Blake guided the small procession along the submerged path. Rain lashed horizontally, driven by strengthening winds that whipped the sea into a frenzy of white-capped waves. The carefully placed markers strained against their moorings, some already torn away by the current. "We've lost visual from shore," Emma's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Conditions deteriorating rapidly. What's your status?" Blake wiped rain from his eyes, struggling to maintain his footing on the slippery concrete support. "Moving slowly. Calves are following. Titan's bringing up the rear." He didn't mention his growing concern about the bull's condition. Titan's breathing had become increasingly labored, his powerful body trembling with exhaustion. The lead calf balked as a particularly large wave washed over the path. Blake steadied the frightened animal, murmuring encouragement. "Easy now." "You're doing fine." Behind him, Titan made a low rumbling sound, nudging the hesitant calf forward. The young animal responded, continuing along the path with renewed determination. "Smart old boy," Blake said, glancing back at Titan with growing admiration. The bull's eyes met his, and Blake was struck again by the intelligence and resolve he saw there. This was no ordinary animal. A sudden shout in his earpiece made Blake wince. "Shark approaching from the south," it was Joe's voice, tense with urgency. "Big one broke off from the group I was leading away, heading straight for you." Blake scanned the churning water, but visibility was poor in the driving rain. His heart hammered against his ribs as he urged the calves to move faster. They were only halfway to shore, still dangerously exposed. "Blake," Emma's voice was controlled but tense. "Derek can see it from the boat. It's Scarside. Moving fast." The name sent a chill through Blake that had nothing to do with the rain soaking his clothes. Old Scarside, the massive bull shark Joe had warned them about, the one that had been circling Titan all day, waiting for an opportunity. "How far?" Blake asked, trying to keep his voice steady for the calves' sake. 200 yards and closing," came Derek's reply. "We're trying to restart the boat engine, but—" A mechanical whine followed by sputtering, then silence. The boat engine had failed again. Blake made a split-second decision. "I'm sending the calves ahead alone. They're following the path well now." Before anyone could object, he turned to the line of young animals. With practiced movements and commands, he urged them forward, knowing they would likely continue along the marked route without him. Then he moved back toward Titan. "Blake, what are you doing?" Emma demanded. "Titan's exhausted," Blake replied, reaching the bull's side. "He won't make it to shore without help." "And what exactly do you think you can do?" Derek's incredulous voice came through. "That bull weighs nearly a ton." Blake didn't answer. He knew how ridiculous it sounded. One man trying to assist a massive Brahman bull through rough waters with a shark approaching. But he couldn't abandon Titan, not after everything the bull had done. Memories of his military training flashed through Blake's mind. Years ago, during water rescue drills, they'd learned that drowning victims often had to be approached from behind to prevent them from pulling their rescuers down in their panic. Animals were no different. Blake positioned himself alongside Titan, one hand gripping the guide rope, the other resting on the bull's massive shoulder. "Come on, old friend," he urged, "just a little further." Together they began moving along the submerged path, Blake guiding Titan onto each concrete support. The bull seemed to understand, carefully placing his hooves where Blake indicated. From shore, the rescue team watched in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah murmured, binoculars trained on the distant figures. "It's like they're communicating." Emma nodded, remembering Blake's stories about Titan's unusual intelligence. "They are, in their own way." "Shark's still coming," Derek warned, his own binoculars focused on a dark shape moving through the water. "100 yards now." In the water, Blake felt Titan suddenly tense. The bull turned his massive head, staring intently at something behind them. Blake followed his gaze, but saw nothing through the rain and spray. "Titan sees him," Blake reported, feeling a surge of dread. "The shark's close." 50 yards, Derek confirmed, moving directly toward you. Blake urged Titan forward, but the bull had stopped, his body rigid with alertness. "Come on," Blake pleaded, tugging gently. "We need to move." Titan didn't budge. Instead, to Blake's astonishment, the bull moved slightly to position himself between Blake and the approaching threat. "Blake, he's protecting you." Sarah's voice was filled with wonder despite the danger, just like he protected those calves. The realization hit Blake with unexpected force. All this time, he'd thought he was the one caring for Titan. Now he understood it had always been mutual. The dark shape materialized through the rain, a massive shark at least 12 feet long, approaching with frightening speed. Blake felt a primal fear grip him, freezing him in place. This wasn't just a predator. This was a force of nature, perfectly evolved for killing. Titan lowered his head, presenting his horns toward the approaching shark. The bull's entire body tensed, preparing for confrontation despite his exhaustion. In that moment, Blake remembered the hurricane night, the fallen tree pinning him down, the rising floodwater. And Titan, appearing through the storm to save him? Not a coincidence, not an accident. "No," Blake said firmly, moving to Titan's side. "Not this time. You're not facing this alone." Blake had grown up swimming in these waters. He knew sharks, respected them, feared them appropriately. But he also knew that many sharks preferred ambush attacks and would veer away from direct confrontation with something large and aggressive. Making a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation, Blake slipped off the concrete support and into deeper water, directly in the shark's path. He began slapping the surface hard, creating as much disturbance as possible, making himself appear larger and more threatening. "Blake!" Emma's horrified voice shouted in his ear. "What are you doing?" "Creating a distraction," Blake replied, continuing to thrash and splash. "Get Titan moving now!" Whether it was Blake's actions or some communication between man and bull, Titan seemed to understand. And the massive animal resumed moving along the path toward shore while Blake continued his desperate distraction. The shark hesitated, its approach slowing as it assessed this new noisy threat. For a moment, Blake thought his plan was working. Then the predator surged forward again, now heading directly for him. Time seemed to slow. Blake saw the shark's dorsal fin cutting through the water, the distinctive notch confirming this was indeed old Scarside. He tried to retreat to the concrete support, but his foot slipped on the slick surface. He went under, salt water filling his nose and mouth. Disoriented, he kicked toward what he hoped was the surface, lungs burning. When he broke through, gasping for air, the shark was almost upon him. Blake could see its black, expressionless eye, its mouth beginning to open. A massive form exploded between them. Titan had turned back, abandoning his path to safety. The bull crashed into the water with tremendous force, directly between Blake and the shark. Sharp horns slashed at the predator, connecting with a solid impact that sent a shudder through the water. The shark veered away, but not before its rough skin scraped along Blake's leg. Pain flared, hot and immediate. Blake knew he was bleeding, creating an even more attractive target. "Blake's injured!" Emma must have seen what happened. "Derek, Joe, someone get out there!" Through a haze of pain, Blake felt something solid beneath his hand, Titan's broad shoulder. The bull had positioned himself to provide support, allowing Blake to pull himself partially out of the water. "Good boy," Blake gasped, clinging to the animal. "Good boy." The shark circled back, drawn by the blood now spreading through the water. Blake knew they had only moments before it attacked again. "Shore!" he urged Titan, pointing toward the distant beach where figures were frantically waving. "Home." Whether Titan understood the words or simply sensed Blake's intent, the bull began moving determinedly toward safety, Blake holding on to his back. Each step on the concrete supports was precarious, especially with Blake's added weight, but Titan moved with surprising steadiness. The shark followed, unwilling to abandon such tempting prey. Blake could see its shadow gliding beneath them, waiting for an opportunity. "It's staying with you," Joe's voice warned through the earpiece. "The blood's got its attention locked." Blake tightened his grip on Titan, wincing as pain shot through his injured leg. He'd seen shark attack victims before, knew exactly what those jaws could do. If he fell again, a sudden shift in the water pressure was his only warning. The shark lunged upward, jaws open, teeth gleaming even in the dim storm light. Titan reacted with startling speed for such a large animal. The bull twisted sideways, one horn slashing downward, catching the shark across its sensitive snout. Blood darkened the water as the predator recoiled. The confrontation had cost them precious balance. Blake felt Titan stumble, one hoof slipping off the concrete support. For a heart-stopping moment, they both teetered on the edge of falling into deeper water. Blake shifted his weight, trying to help Titan regain balance. His military training had never covered this scenario, clinging to a wounded bull in stormy seas while a shark circled below. But the fundamental principles remained. Work with your team, adapt, survive. "Steady," Blake murmured against Titan's ear. "We're almost there." The bull regained his footing, and they continued their precarious journey. The shark, perhaps deterred by its injury or simply waiting for an easier opportunity, maintained its distance for the moment. On shore, the rescue team had managed to corral the calves safely. All attention was now focused on the man and bull making their painful way through the churning water. "They're not going to make it," Derek said grimly as another marker buoy tore free in the strengthening current. "The storm's getting worse." Emma refused to accept defeat. "Joe, can you get your boat closer?" The old fisherman shook his head. Engines running, but these waves would dash us against the concrete. We'd sink before we could help. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been studying the coastal map. Now she straightened suddenly. There's another way. She pointed to a spot on the map. The old pier foundation curves here. If they can reach this point, they'll be in shallower water, protected somewhat by that sandbar extension. Emma grabbed her radio. "Blake, change course. 40 degrees to your right. There's a shallower section." Through pain and exhaustion, Blake heard the instruction. He guided Titan in the new direction, praying the bull had enough strength left. The shark followed, relentless. Blake could sense its growing frustration, its predatory patience wearing thin. The next attack would come soon. They reached the curve in the pier foundation that Sarah had identified. The water was indeed shallower here, only chest deep on Blake. For the first time since beginning their desperate journey, he felt a flicker of hope. "We're going to make it," he told Titan, his voice hoarse from swallowing salt water. "Just a little further." The bull trudged forward, each step heavy with exhaustion. Blake could feel tremors running through the powerful body. Titan was operating on sheer will now, beyond physical limits. Without warning, a massive wave crashed over them, the product of the intensifying storm. Blake was torn from Titan's side, tumbling through the churning water. He fought to surface, disoriented and gasping. When he managed to right himself, he realized with horror that the wave had pushed them off the submerged path. They were in open water now, with no concrete supports beneath them, and the shark was closing in. Titan struggled to reach Blake, but the bull was clearly at the end of his endurance. Years of caring for animals had taught Blake to recognize when one was about to collapse. Titan was there. In that moment, Blake made his decision. He would not let Titan die saving him. Not after everything the bull had already sacrificed. Using the last of his strength, Blake positioned himself between Titan and the approaching shark. He had no weapon, no plan beyond drawing the predator away from the exhausted bull. "Go!" he shouted at Titan, slapping the water to drive the bull toward shore. "Go home!" Titan hesitated, unwilling to abandon Blake despite his urging. The shark charged. Blake braced himself for the impact, for the tearing pain that would follow. Instead, he felt something solid slam into him from behind, pushing him forcefully aside. Titan had lunged forward, meeting the shark's attack head-on. Man and predator collided in a chaotic churning of water and blood. "No!" Blake screamed, struggling toward them. For a few terrible seconds, the water boiled with the violent confrontation. Then Titan resurfaced, bleeding from new wounds but still fighting. The shark circled back, itself now injured but driven by feeding instinct. Blake reached Titan's side just as the shark made another pass. Together they faced the predator, man and bull united against a common threat. What happened next would later be described by witnesses on shore as nothing short of miraculous. As the shark charged again, both Blake and Titan moved in perfect synchronization. Blake ducked underwater while Titan lowered his head. The bull's horns connected solidly with the shark's sensitive gill area just as Blake kicked powerfully at its underbelly. The combined assault was too much. The shark veered away, trailing blood, and disappeared into deeper water. Exhausted beyond measure, Blake clung to Titan as they resumed their journey toward shore. The bull was moving sluggishly now, each step an obvious struggle. "Just a little further," Blake encouraged, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Titan or himself. His injured leg had gone worryingly numb, and cold was seeping into his core despite the relative warmth of the Florida water. Through the driving rain, Blake could make out figures wading out to meet them. Emma, Derek, and several others forming a human chain to reach them. "They're coming," he told Titan. "Help is coming." The bull's only response was to continue his dogged progress toward shore, one painful step at a time. As the rescue team reached them, Blake felt himself being lifted, supported by strong hands. Someone was examining his leg, applying pressure to the wound. Medical terminology filtered through his consciousness. Significant laceration, needs stitches, blood loss. But Blake's attention remained fixed on Titan. The bull had finally stopped moving, standing chest deep in the water, his massive head hanging with exhaustion, blood streaming from multiple wounds. "Help him," Blake insisted, trying to push away the hands that were attempting to move him to shore. "Titan, first. We've got him," Emma assured him. "Dr. Sarah's team is here. They'll take care of him." As if to confirm her words, a team of people converged around the bull. Blake recognized Sarah directing them as they carefully secured flotation devices around Titan's body to help support his weight. Only then did Blake allow himself to be helped toward the beach. As the adrenaline ebbed, pain flooded back, making him grit his teeth to avoid crying out. Through the haze of discomfort, a realization crystallized with perfect clarity. He had always valued Titan as a prized bull, an exceptional example of the breed, an asset to his ranch, but today had revealed the truth that some part of him had always known. Titan was so much more. He was family. Blake drifted in and out of consciousness as the paramedics worked on his leg. The storm continued to rage around them, but the rescue team had established a makeshift shelter on the beach, a canvas tarp stretched between vehicles to create a protected area. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Blake kept asking about Titan. "He's holding on," Emma would tell him each time. "Dr. Sarah's with him." The shark's teeth had left deep gashes along Blake's calf, but the paramedic, a stocky man named Martinez, assured him the wounds looked worse than they were. "No major arteries hit. You're lucky." Lucky wasn't the word Blake would have chosen. Watching Titan battle the shark, seeing the bull place himself in harm's way repeatedly, that wasn't luck. That was something else entirely. As Martinez finished bandaging his leg, Blake struggled to sit up. "I need to see him." "You need to go to the hospital," Martinez countered. "Those wounds need proper cleaning and stitches." "After I see Titan," Blake insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument. Perhaps recognizing the futility of debating, Martinez sighed and helped Blake to his feet. With the paramedic supporting him on one side and Emma on the other, Blake limped across the beach to where a larger shelter had been erected. Beneath it lay Titan. The bull was stretched out on his side, his massive body supported by inflatable cushions to prevent pressure sores. Dr. Sarah and two assistants worked methodically, cleaning and treating the numerous wounds that marked Titan's hide. An IV line had been established in his neck, delivering fluids and medication. "He's severely dehydrated and exhausted," Sarah explained without looking up from her work. "These lacerations are deep, but thankfully none penetrated the abdominal cavity." Blake lowered himself painfully to the ground beside Titan's head. The bull's eyes were half closed, his breathing labored but steady. When Blake placed a gentle hand on his forehead, Titan's eyes opened fully, focusing on Blake with unmistakable recognition. "Hey, old friend," Blake said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You did good today. Real good." Titan made a low, rumbling sound in his throat, the same sound Blake had heard him make when calming nervous calves. Despite everything, the bull was still trying to communicate. "I know," Blake continued, stroking the broad forehead. "I know what you did. For those calves. For me." He swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat. "I won't forget it." Dr. Sarah paused in her work, watching the interaction with undisguised fascination. "I've treated livestock for 20 years, she said quietly. "I've never seen a connection like this between a rancher and a bull." Blake didn't respond immediately. How could he explain what had developed between him and Titan? It went beyond the normal bond between man and animal. Today had proven that. "Where are the calves?" he asked instead. "Safe in the transport trailer," Emma answered. "All 6 of them, including the little Angus. Joe's already called the Miller family. They're on their way." Blake nodded, relieved. At least some good would come from this ordeal. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Sarah said, her tone becoming more professional. "Titan needs more extensive care than we can provide here. We need to transport him to the large animal hospital in Gainesville." "That's 3 hours away," Blake said, frowning. "It's the closest facility with the equipment to handle his injuries properly. The alternative is—" She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Blake looked down at Titan, taking in the bull's battered condition. The animal had pushed himself far beyond normal endurance, fighting both nature and predators to protect others. He deserved every chance at recovery. "Do it," Blake decided. "Whatever he needs." Sarah nodded, returning to her work. "The transport is already on its way. Should be here within the hour, assuming the roads aren't flooded." Blake stayed by Titan's side as the veterinary team continued their treatment. The rain had slackened somewhat, though wind still buffeted the makeshift shelter. Around them, the rescue personnel were packing equipment, their mission complete. "Blake," Emma's voice was gentle but insistent, "you need to go to the hospital now. Martinez is waiting to transport you." "I'm not leaving until Titan's safely loaded," Blake replied stubbornly. Emma looked like she might argue, but instead sat down beside him. For a few minutes they watched in silence as Sarah's team worked. "What made you do it?" Emma finally asked. "Go into the water after him." Most people would have written him off as just livestock. Blake considered the question, remembering his earlier reluctance to admit how much Titan meant to him. "I guess I finally understood what my father tried to teach me, that some animals are more than just animals." He stroked Titan's forehead again. "And some connections are worth risking everything for." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I've worked with wildlife for 12 years. Sometimes I see things that make me question everything science teaches us about animal consciousness." She glanced at Titan. Today was one of those times. A commotion at the edge of the beach drew their attention. A small crowd had gathered, local residents who had heard about the dramatic rescue. Among them, Blake recognized old Joe Blackwood standing beside a petite woman and a young girl clutching a stuffed animal. Joe spotted Blake and waved, then guided his companions toward the shelter. "Mr. Thompson," Joe called as they approached. "Got some folks here who wanted to thank you and that remarkable bull of yours." The young girl, Blake guessed she was around 10, stared wide-eyed at Titan. The woman beside her, presumably her mother, placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "This is Jessica Miller and her mother Helen," Joe introduced them. "Jessica's calf is one you and Titan rescued today." Blake extended his hand, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at sore muscles. "It was mostly Titan, to be honest. He's the hero here." Jessica stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the bull. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked in a small voice. "He's tough," Blake assured her, though his own worry was evident. "The doctors are going to take very good care of him." The girl nodded solemnly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a handmade bracelet of colorful braided threads. "I made this for good luck," she said, "for my calf. But I think your bull needs it more." Before any adult could intervene, Jessica stepped carefully around Dr. Sarah and gently placed the bracelet on Titan's broad neck, tucking it securely against his hide. "Thank you for saving Midnight," she whispered to the bull. Titan's eye, which had been drifting closed with exhaustion, opened fully at the girl's touch. The massive animal remained perfectly still as the child stepped back, as if understanding the significance of her gift. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a large vehicle, the animal transport from Gainesville. Two technicians climbed out, conferring immediately with Dr. Sarah about Titan's condition. "We need to load him now if we're going to make it back before dark," one of them said, eyeing the stormy sky. What followed was a carefully choreographed operation. Using the flotation devices already supporting Titan and additional straps and pulleys, the team maneuvered the 1,000-pound bull onto a reinforced stretcher. Despite his weakened state, Titan remained calm throughout the process, his eyes often seeking out Blake as if for reassurance. "It's okay, boy," Blake kept saying. "These folks are going to help you." When the time came to load Titan into the transport vehicle, Blake insisted on accompanying him up the ramp, ignoring the pain in his injured leg. Only when Titan was secured for the journey did Blake finally agree to seek medical attention for himself. "I'll follow you to Gainesville as soon as they patch me up," he promised Titan, placing one final pat on the bull's shoulder. "You just focus on getting better." As the transport doors closed, Blake felt an unexpected sense of loss. For 5 years, Titan had been a constant presence on his ranch. The thought of returning to Sunrise pastures without him felt wrong somehow. The hospital in Clearwater treated Blake's wounds efficiently, 16 stitches, a tetanus shot, and strict instructions to watch for signs of infection. By the time he was released, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind clear skies and the fresh scent of rain-washed air. Emma was waiting for him in the hospital lobby, having promised to drive him to Gainesville once he was treated. "The calves are settled at your ranch," she informed him. "Your neighbor Robert agreed to check on them tonight." Blake nodded gratefully. "And any word on Titan?" "Dr. Sarah called about an hour ago. He's stable but critical. The next 24 hours will be telling." The drive to Gainesville passed in relative silence, both Blake and Emma lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. Occasionally, Emma would share updates from her team. The sandbar was completely submerged now. The sharks had dispersed. The community was buzzing with talk of the rescue. "Local news is calling him the Guardian Bull," she mentioned at one point. "Someone got video of Titan fighting off the shark when you were knocked off the path. It's already going viral online." Blake barely registered this information. His mind was fixed on Titan, on the way the bull had positioned himself between Blake and danger, on the intelligence in those eyes when he'd guided the calves along the submerged path. "I almost sold him," Blake said suddenly, breaking a long silence. 3 weeks ago. Signed preliminary paperwork with Henderson Meat Processing." Emma glanced at him but said nothing, letting him continue. $15,000? Would have covered my mortgage payments through winter, given me breathing room with the bank." Blake stared out the window at the passing landscape. "I kept putting off finalizing the deal. Couldn't bring myself to make that call." "And now?" Emma asked quietly. Blake shook his head. "Now I'd lose the whole damn ranch before I'd let anyone take him to slaughter." They arrived at the veterinary hospital shortly after sunset. The large animal facility was impressive, a modern complex with specialized equipment for treating horses, cattle, and other livestock. Dr. Sarah met them in the reception area, her face showing signs of exhaustion but also cautious optimism. "He's responding well to treatment," she reported as she led them through the building. "The wounds are severe but clean. We've started him on antibiotics and pain management. His vital signs are stable." She paused outside a large treatment stall. "There's something else you should know. We did a full blood panel when he arrived, standard procedure for trauma cases." Sarah hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Titan's genetic markers are unusual." "Unusual how?" Blake asked, frowning. "I'd need to run more tests to be certain, but based on preliminary results, he appears to carry a rare genetic variation sometimes found in Brahman cattle. It's associated with enhanced cognitive function and unusual social behaviors." Blake remembered Mason's words when he'd first acquired Titan as a calf. "Some animals are just born with an old soul." So you're saying he's actually measurably different from other bulls? Blake asked. Sarah nodded. I believe so, yes. There's a researcher at the university who studies cognitive abilities in livestock. She'd be very interested in meeting Titan once he's recovered. Blake wasn't sure how he felt about that. The thought of Titan becoming a research subject didn't sit well with him, but that was a concern for another day. Right now, all that mattered was the bull's recovery. Can I see him? He asked. Sarah pushed open the door to the treatment stall. Inside, Titan lay on a thick bed of clean straw, various monitors attached to track his vital signs. His wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, and an IV line delivered fluids and medication. Despite his battered condition, there was a peacefulness to his posture that Blake found encouraging. When Blake spoke his name, Titan's ears twitched and his eyes opened. Recognition was immediate and unmistakable. Hey, big guy, Blake said softly, approaching the bull with careful steps. You're looking better already. As Blake settled onto a small stool beside him, Titan released a deep breath, almost like a sigh of relief. The bull's massive head shifted slightly, coming to rest against Blake's leg in a gesture of absolute trust. Doctor. Sarah watched from the doorway, her scientific curiosity temporarily overshadowed by the simple power of the connection she was witnessing. I'll leave you two alone, she said quietly. Call if you need anything. When she was gone, Blake finally allowed himself to process the day's events fully. The desperate swim to the sandbar, the terror of the shark attack, the moment Titan had placed himself in harm's way to protect Blake. And beneath it all, the knowledge that he had nearly traded this extraordinary animal for mere money. I'm sorry, he whispered, stroking Titan's broad forehead. I didn't understand, but I do now. Titan's dark eye regarded him steadily, without judgment. When you're better, Blake continued, we're going home. Both of us. And things are going to be different. The bull made a soft, rumbling sound, as if in agreement. Outside the treatment stall, Emma waited with Dr. Sarah. When Blake eventually emerged, his face showed both exhaustion and resolution. He's resting, he reported. Seems comfortable. The prognosis is good, Sarah assured him. Barring complications, he should make a full recovery. Though he'll always carry those scars. Blake nodded, his mind already racing ahead. I need to make some calls. Figure out how to keep the ranch running until he's well enough to come home. Emma exchanged glances with Sarah. Actually, she said, there's something you should know. While you were in with Titan, Joe Blackwood called. Word of what happened today has spread through the community. People want to help. Help? Blake echoed, not understanding. The Millers have started a fundraiser to cover Titan's medical expenses. It's already raised over $5,000 in just a few hours, and 3 local farmers have offered to loan you breeding bulls until Titan recovers. Blake stared at her, momentarily speechless. His relationship with the local community had always been cordial but distant. He'd never expected this kind of support. And there's more, Emma continued. The university's agricultural department called. They're interested in documenting Titan's story and potentially offering a research grant to study his unusual behaviors. The kind of grant that comes with funding. For the first time that day, Blake felt a flicker of hope for the future, not just for Titan's recovery, but for the ranch itself. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say you'll accept the help, Dr. Sarah suggested gently, for Titan's sake, if not your own. Blake thought about the bull resting in the treatment stall, about the courage and intelligence he'd displayed, about the lives he'd saved, both human and animal. Okay, he agreed finally, for Titan. As they walked toward the hospital exit, planning to find a nearby hotel for the night, Blake's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Robert, his neighbor, with a photo attached. The picture showed the 6 rescued calves, including the little black Angus, clustered together in the barn at Sunrise Pastures. They appeared calm and content, having recovered remarkably well from their ordeal. Blake smiled at the image, then paused, noticing something odd. The calves weren't arranged randomly. They were positioned in a tight circle, with the smallest and weakest in the center, exactly the way Titan had taught them to stand when facing a threat. Even in his absence, the bull's influence remained. "He really did save them," Blake murmured. "Not just their lives. He taught them how to survive." Emma peered at the photo. "Extraordinary," she agreed. "Almost like he was passing on knowledge." Blake tucked the phone away, a new understanding solidifying within him. Titan wasn't just an exceptional bull. He was a guardian in the truest sense of the word, protecting not only with his strength, but with his wisdom. And Blake vowed silently that from this day forward, he would be worthy of the trust Titan had placed in him. 3 months later, a gentle Florida dawn broke over Sunrise Pastures. Blake Thompson stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the first golden rays illuminate the newly rebuilt fences and renovated barn. The hurricane damage had been fully repaired, the pastures lush with fresh growth after the rainy season. "Morning, Titan," he called, as a massive silver-gray form emerged from the barn. The Brahman bull moved with deliberate grace toward the porch, his powerful muscles rippling beneath a coat that once again gleamed with health. Though prominent scars still marked his hide, testaments to his battle with the shark, they had healed well under Dr. Sarah's care. The only lingering effect was a slight favoring of his right foreleg when he was tired. Blake descended the porch steps, reaching out to scratch the sweet spot behind Titan's ears that always made the bull lean into his touch. "Ready for visitors today, big guy?" Titan responded with a soft, rumbling sound that Blake had come to recognize as contentment. The bond between man and bull had deepened during Titan's recovery, evolving into something that visitors to the ranch often commented on with amazement. The past 3 months had transformed Sunrise Pastures in ways Blake could never have imagined on that stormy day when he'd nearly lost everything. The community fundraiser, initially started to cover Titan's medical expenses, had snowballed as news of the guardian bull spread. Local coverage had given way to national interest, and eventually a documentary team had approached Blake about filming Titan's story. The resulting publicity had created new opportunities. With guidance from Emma and the Wildlife Service, Blake had converted part of the ranch into an educational center focusing on animal behavior and conservation. School groups now visited regularly, with Titan serving as the star attraction, a role the bull seemed to accept with dignified patience. The university research grant had provided additional funding, allowing Blake to upgrade his facilities while participating in a groundbreaking study on cognitive abilities in cattle. Dr. Sarah visited weekly, documenting Titan's interactions with the herd and marveling at his problem-solving skills. "He's rewriting what we know about bovine intelligence," she had told Blake just last week. "The way he trains the younger animals, his spatial awareness, his apparent empathy, it's extraordinary." Blake had simply nodded. He no longer needed scientific validation of what he witnessed daily. The same bull who had battled sharks to protect stranded calves now gently guided new additions to the herd, showing remarkable patience with the young and infirm. The sound of approaching vehicles drew Blake's attention to the driveway. Right on schedule, the yellow school bus appeared, followed by Emma's Ranger truck and a familiar old pickup that belonged to Joe Blackwood. "Showtime," Blake told Titan with a smile. As the vehicles parked in the newly expanded lot, Blake walked out to greet his visitors. Emma emerged from her truck, accompanied by Derek Carson and 2 other Rangers. Their initial professional involvement with Blake and Titan had evolved into friendship over the months. "Morning, Blake," Emma called. "Beautiful day for a field trip." From the school bus, a stream of excited children poured out, chaperoned by teachers attempting to maintain some semblance of order. Blake recognized the logos on their shirts: Clearwater Elementary, the school where Jessica Miller was a student, and there was Jessica herself, one of the first children off the bus, clutching a folder of papers and barely containing her excitement. Behind her came her mother, Helen, who had become a regular volunteer at the ranch's educational events. "Mr. Thompson," Jessica called, racing ahead of her classmates. "Is Titan ready for our presentation?" "He's been looking forward to it all morning," Blake assured her with a wink. "He's by the porch." The girl beamed and hurried toward the bull, showing none of the fear that many adults still exhibited around the massive animal. Blake had marveled at their connection since the day Jessica had placed her good luck bracelet on Titan's neck during the rescue. Though the bracelet itself had been removed during medical treatment, Jessica had created a more durable replacement: a blue and white halter rope with braided threads that Titan now wore for special occasions. Joe Blackwood approached at a more measured pace, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he clasped Blake's hand. "Ranch is looking good, Thompson." "Real good." "Couldn't have done it without your help," Blake acknowledged. It was no exaggeration. After the rescue, Joe had rallied local farmers and fishermen to assist with rebuilding. More importantly, his endless stories about Titan, some factual, some embellished with a fisherman's gift for storytelling, had helped create the local legend that ultimately saved the ranch. "Any word from the Millers about their calf?" Joe asked. Blake nodded. "Midnight's thriving. Jessica's planning to show her at the county fair next month." The little black Angus calf that Titan had rescued had become something of a celebrity herself. Reunited with the Miller family, she had recovered completely from her ordeal and now served as Jessica's 4-H project. The girl visited the ranch at least weekly, often bringing updated photos to show Titan how Midnight is doing, convinced that the bull understood and cared about the calf's progress. Blake sometimes wondered if she was right. Titan always seemed to pay special attention when Jessica spoke about Midnight, his ears forward, his gaze focused on the pictures she held up. The teachers had organized the children into groups, and the planned activities for the day began. One group headed toward the barn with Derek for a lesson on animal care. Another gathered under a shade tree with Emma to learn about local wildlife conservation. A third group, led by Dr. Sarah, who had just arrived, settled in the small classroom Blake had created from a converted storage building. Jessica's group, the one scheduled to interact directly with Titan, waited expectantly as Blake approached. "Who remembers the rules for meeting Titan?" he asked. "No sudden movements," one boy called out. "Speak in normal voices," added another child. "And show respect," Jessica concluded solemnly. "Because he's a hero." Blake nodded approvingly. "That's right. Titan is special, but he's still a bull, and a very large one. So we follow the rules to keep everyone safe." He glanced at Helen and the other parent volunteers. "Ready?" With the adults positioned strategically around the group, Blake led the children to where Titan waited patiently near the porch. Despite his imposing size, nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing close to a ton, the bull's demeanor was gentle as the children approached. "Today, we're going to learn about animal communication," Blake began, falling into the teaching role that had become increasingly familiar. "Titan here communicates in ways that might seem subtle to us, but they're actually very clear if you know what to look for." He demonstrated how Titan's ear positions, head movements, and vocalizations conveyed different meanings. The bull cooperated perfectly, as if understanding his role in the lesson. "Now, who would like to try greeting Titan properly?" Blake asked. Every hand shot up, but Jessica was selected first, likely due to her experience. The girl approached confidently, stopped at the respectful distance Blake had taught, and extended her hand palm down. Titan lowered his massive head, gently touching his muzzle to her hand in a greeting that drew gasps of delight from the other children. "He remembers me," Jessica announced proudly. "He certainly does," Blake agreed. "Titan has an excellent memory, especially for people who've been kind to him." One by one, the other children were guided through proper greetings. Titan remained patient throughout, his behavior impeccable despite the excitement around him. As the session continued, Blake noticed Joe standing slightly apart, watching with an expression that mingled pride with something like vindication. "Something on your mind, Joe?" Blake asked quietly when he had a moment away from the children. The old fisherman gestured toward Titan. "40 years I've been telling folks about the special creatures in these waters. About how animals understand more than we give them credit for. Most people just smiled and nodded, thinking, 'There goes old Joe with his tall tales.'" He chuckled softly. "Now look at this. School field trips and university studies, all because that bull of yours proved what I've been saying all along." Blake followed his gaze to where Titan stood surrounded by admiring children. "He's changed a lot of minds," he agreed. "Mine included." As the morning progressed, the groups rotated through their activities. By lunchtime, the children gathered at picnic tables set up in the shade of old oak trees, their excited chatter filling the air as they compared notes on what they'd learned. Blake found himself standing with Emma, Joe, and Dr. Sarah, watching the scene with satisfaction. "I never pictured Sunrise Pastures like this," he admitted. "Teaching kids, hosting researchers, becoming some kind of educational center." "It suits you," Emma observed. "Both of you." She nodded toward Titan, who had settled nearby, seemingly content to observe the activity around him. Dr. Sarah's expression was more analytical. "What you've created here is remarkable, Blake. Not just the facility, but the bridge between scientific research and public education. People connect with Titan's story on an emotional level, which opens them to learning about larger concepts of animal cognition and conservation." "He's the real teacher," Blake said, watching as Titan gently accepted an offered apple from Jessica. "I'm just the translator." After lunch, the final activity of the day commenced, a special presentation the children had prepared. Jessica, elected spokesperson for her class, stood before the gathered adults and children, her folder of papers clutched tightly. "For the past month, our class has been studying heroes," she began, her voice clear despite her evident nervousness. "We learned about different kinds of heroes, soldiers, firefighters, doctors, and everyday people who do brave things." She gestured to her classmates, who held up colorful posters they had created. "We decided that Titan is all kinds of hero. He's brave like a soldier, helpful like a doctor, and he saves lives like a firefighter." One by one, the children presented their projects, stories they had written about Titan, artwork depicting his rescue of the calves, and facts they had researched about Brahman cattle. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their admiration for the bull genuine and heartfelt. "And now," Jessica concluded, "we have a special surprise." At her signal, one of the teachers brought forward a large framed certificate which Jessica presented to Blake with solemn ceremony. "Our class voted to make Titan an honorary guardian of Clearwater," she announced. "Mayor Franklin signed it officially." Blake accepted the certificate, genuinely touched by the gesture. The document, adorned with the town seal and signed by both the mayor and every child in the class, proclaimed Titan a true hero and guardian of our community. "I don't know what to say," Blake admitted, looking from the certificate to the expectant faces before him. "Except thank you. Titan would thank you too, if he could." As if on cue, the bull approached, standing beside Blake as the children applauded. A photographer from the local paper captured the moment. Man and bull together, surrounded by admiring children, the certificate held where Titan could seemingly inspect it. The image would later appear on the front page of the Clearwater Gazette, with the caption, "Local Hero Honored, the Bull Who Changed How We See Animals." As the school bus departed later that afternoon, Blake found himself alone with Titan in the golden light of early evening. The educational center was quiet now, the day's excitement replaced by peaceful calm. "You did good today, old friend," Blake told the bull, scratching that favorite spot behind his ears. "Made quite an impression on those kids." Titan leaned into the touch, releasing a contented sound deep in his throat. Blake's thoughts drifted to how much had changed in 3 short months. The ranch that had been on the verge of foreclosure was now financially stable, thanks to the educational programs and research grants. The community that had once been just neighbors was now a network of support and friendship. And Blake himself had transformed from a struggling rancher focused solely on survival to someone with a new purpose. All because of the bull standing beside him. "You know, my father used to say that sometimes the animals we raise end up raising something in us," Blake mused aloud. "Didn't understand what he meant until now." Titan shifted, turning his massive head to look directly at Blake with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold such depth of understanding. "Mason was right about you from the start," Blake continued. "You do have an old soul." In the distance, a pair of deer emerged from the tree line, cautiously approaching the pond at the edge of the property. Titan watched them with interest but remained relaxed, exhibiting none of the territorial behavior typical of bulls. Blake had noticed this change in recent weeks, Titan's apparent awareness extending beyond cattle to other animals. Dr. Sarah was documenting this development, fascinated by what she called his expanding circle of concern. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Blake led Titan toward the barn. The bull would sleep in his special stall tonight, though he often chose to remain outside with the herd when weather permitted. "Big day tomorrow," Blake reminded him. "The documentary crew is coming back for final interviews." The film about Titan's rescue had evolved into a broader exploration of animal intelligence and the bonds between humans and animals. Blake had initially been hesitant about the publicity but had come to see it as an opportunity to share an important message. As he secured the barn for the night, making sure Titan had fresh water and ample feed, Blake reflected on the certificate the children had presented. Honorary Guardian of Clearwater seemed fitting for a bull who had risked his life to protect others. But in Blake's mind, Titan's guardianship extended beyond the physical act of protection. The bull had become a guardian of something less tangible but equally vital, a reminder of the intelligence, courage, and compassion that could exist in unexpected places. "Good night, Titan," Blake said, giving the bull a final pat before heading toward the house. Titan watched him go, then settled comfortably in his stall, the blue and white halter rope Jessica had made hanging nearby, a symbol of the connections that now defined Sunrise Pastures. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, shining down on a ranch that had been transformed by the extraordinary actions of one remarkable bull and the ripples of change those actions had created. In the morning, Blake would rise to continue the work that had become his new calling, sharing Titan's story, educating visitors about animal intelligence, and honoring the lessons he'd learned from his most unexpected teacher. For now, though, bull and man rested, each in their own way, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a connection that transcended the traditional boundaries between human and animal, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. And in Clearwater, Florida, the legend of the guardian bull would continue to grow, inspiring new generations to look more deeply at the animals around them and to recognize the remarkable capacity for courage, intelligence, and love that might be discovered there. As old Joe Blackwood often said when finishing his stories at the local diner, "Sometimes what we save ends up saving us." That's the thing about true guardians. They protect more than just lives. They protect what makes life worth living. In the golden years of life, we often reflect on what truly matters. This extraordinary tale of Titan, the guardian bull, reminds us that sometimes the most profound connections come from unexpected places. Like many of you who've weathered life's storms, Titan showed us that age brings not just scars, but wisdom and courage. Remember when animals were more than pets. They were working partners, even family. Blake Thompson rediscovered this truth when his prized bull risked everything to protect others. Isn't this the legacy we all hope to leave behind? Not measured in dollars, but in lives touched and hearts moved. As Blake's father wisely said, sometimes the animals we raise end up raising something in us. In your lifetime, what unexpected relationship has taught you the most valuable lessons? Perhaps like Titan, you found purpose in protecting others, or like Blake, discovered that what you thought was just business was actually the cornerstone of something far more meaningful. Have you ever had an animal in your life that showed remarkable intelligence or loyalty beyond what you thought possible? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.